I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and here today with me is Dr. Peter Megaw, Chief Exploration Officer at Meg Silver. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
It's a real pleasure, at least virtually being with you.
At least virtually, as most meetings seem to be these days. So let's jump right into our questions. I think definitely we need to start off by talking about Meg's recent news. I know the company hit a major milestone fairly recently with the announcement of first production. So obviously, it's been a long journey to get to that point. I wondered if you could talk to me a little bit about the home stretch and, in particular, how it was going through that process during the interesting times we've seen this year with COVID-19.
Well, you're right. It has been a haul. We drilled the discovery hole was drilled in 2003, and then it has just been, as George describes it, the gift that keeps on giving. The thing has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, which has meant we've upscaled the project a couple of times. Um, that's a Hollywood problem. It does result in a longer time frame, but it means that you ultimately have a bigger and more profitable mine when you're done. Our partners, Fresnillo PLC, 56% members of the joint venture, and the operators have done a magnificent job building it out. They've also done a magnificent job dealing with COVID-19. In fact, their protocols are effectively the ones that the government of Mexico has taken and applied throughout the mining industry. So they've done a very good job managing that, which has, I think we were down on the surface for a month, but the underground work never stopped. So that's moved forward quite smartly. As we're approaching the home stretch, you mentioned that we're in production, and this is actually pretty high grade production, which is simply coming from development muck. As we're building out all of the headings that we need to be producing at 4,000 tons a day, we are generating a fair amount of very well mineralized rock, which we pile up at the entrance to the portal, and that goes off to the mill right next door at Fresnillo. And this gives us a phenomenal opportunity to we will have close to probably 9 months experience of how this material will mill before we crank up our own mill. We are expecting that our mill will be commissioned starting mid next year because of the fact that we will have all of this practice on mineralized material. We should be able to be in 85% of capacity by the end of 2021, which is a very, very quick ramp up. Of course, the flip side of this is we get paid for this. It's not an enormous amount of material. It's about 16,000 tons a month. And the revenue from that goes to the joint venture. It doesn't flow necessarily to MAG, but it means it offsets money that we would have to send to the joint venture. So it's a very good opportunity for us, not just from the financial, but especially from the technical side.
All right. And as your comments are really making clear, just because you reach your first production doesn't mean the work is all over. In fact, there's lots more to do. And I think you've given us an idea of that, but I wondered if you have exploration work still going on. What does that look like in terms of the next steps forward?
Well, of course, that's my wheelhouse is exploration. And, I don't want to call it a problem, but one of the realities of how big the Valdecañas vein system has become is that the focus really has been to drill it off and see how big it is, because everything is overbuilt, and it's done that way very deliberately because the potential exists to dramatically expand the production fairly quickly. And so our partners in MAG, we're all looking at what the potential for that is, and got to drill off that deeper part of the resource to be able to make that decision. So that effectively holds up a lot of the drill rigs. And I would love to be out drilling on other parts of the property. My second favorite target on the property is finally the permits are submitted to the government. We're waiting for them to recover from COVID-19 enough to get all of that processed. So, I'm hopeful that we will have some holes being drilled off of the Valdecañas vein in the near future. Uh, but I got to say, with the kind of stuff that we have historically found in the Valdecañas vein, and we're now directing holes deliberately at the Anticipada and pre-Anticipada hanging wall veins, that all, and not to mention the northeast trending Venadas family, this is all adding substantial volume of mineralized material very close to the infrastructure that we're building, which, as George, as a mining engineer, will tell you, builds in phenomenal flexibility in terms of your operation. So, it's a challenge to get 4,000 tons a day out from underground. If you want to get more than that out, it's even bigger challenge. But because of the volume we have close to the infrastructure, we should be minimizing that risk very substantially.
Right. And, you're starting production in a year that's been very positive for silver. You've said in the past that the aim is for MAG to be one of the lowest cost producers, if not the lowest in the world. Are you on track to achieve that goal? And what does that mean with the price higher?
Well, the fundamental beauty of the Valdecañas vein system is the grade is very high, and that in itself lends you to be highly profitable. And not only is the silver grade high, but we have a couple of grams of gold. We've got 5 or 6% combined lead and zinc. So depending on how you want to look at the numbers, we produce silver at $5.60 an ounce on an all-in silver equivalent basis. This is according to our 2017 PEA at $17.47 an ounce silver price. Or you take the byproduct credits, the gold and the base metals, subtract that from the operating cost, and you wind up producing silver at probably a negative number. Now you take that 1750 roughly silver price and ratchet it up to better than $20, and that's all gravy. So we're obviously very happy to see the higher silver price. Would still point out that the world is uncertain. We're so high grade that even if silver goes back to $8 an ounce, which we haven't seen in a couple of decades, this thing still has a 15% after-tax IRR. And that's really the measure that matters. For an investor, that's the kind of thing that lets you sleep at night. You don't have to worry about whether the silver price is fluctuating $1 or $2. You're pretty well covered on the downside. And depending on what you think is going to happen in terms of the silver price in the future, you potentially will be partying all night, depending on what direction that goes or how high that goes.
Any thoughts on where the silver price could be headed? I know it's difficult, if not impossible, to make predictions, but any ideas on where it could be going?
My flip answer to that is because our grade is so high, we don't have to worry about where the price of silver is going. And I can look at all the macroeconomic stuff. I can listen to the gurus. I've been a silver geologist for close to 40 years now. I've seen it go up, down, and sideways for extended periods of time. My crystal ball is no better than anybody else's. So I cover myself by focusing on high grade, and the fact that we have found so much, so high grade, really covers that pretty well. So I'll leave the predictions of where it's going to other people. I can look at the demand side and see that as solar moves forward, hundreds of millions of ounces of silver will be added to the demand side over time. We can look at the production side and we can see that silver production is dropping off worldwide. All of those go into predictions of which direction silver is going. And, according to the predictions based on our 2017 PEA, we're going to be producing 20 plus million ounces of silver a year from Juanicipio for a number of years. That's going to make us the world's biggest silver producer. So, primary silver producer. There are still some byproduct folks who make close to that much. So we think the future looks pretty good.
We've been talking a lot about Juanicipio because of the production news, but Meg also recently acquired another property. Maybe you could talk to me a little bit about that project and what has you excited there.
We acquired the Deer Trail property in Utah. Um, Actually, if you're showing my picture, that's the Deer Trail Mountain on the side of the behind me in my virtual background. This is a classic carbonate replacement deposit. I actually was first on the ground in Deer Trail in 1982. I've consulted to the property off and on for the last close to 40 years. Um, it was a complex situation in terms of the land ownership and getting things cleaned up so that we could make the deal on the property. In other words, it took years of patience. I mean, we started working on the acquisition in 2016, and we've gone in to what we think is a very high potential property. It's a historic high grade producer, 350 to 465 grams silver, plus 15% lead zinc, plus 3-4 grams of gold, 0.5% of copper. Those were the historic production grades on the itself. We have very strong evidence that it is linked to a porphyry copper moly system just to the west, a few kilometers. So the mineralization is probably continuous. It lies on an enormous regional fault, the Wasatch Fault, which is the division between the Colorado Plateau and the Great Basin. This is exactly where you want to be on a big regional fault like that. Up the road from us, we have the historic Tintic District, and just past that is the Bingham Canyon Porphyry Copper, which is one of the world's 2 or 3 best porphyry copper mines. And what many people don't recognize is that Bingham was completely surrounded by high-grade silver, lead, zinc, copper, gold replacement mineralization, exactly the same style of what we're seeing at Deer Trail. We have new evidence that suggests these are age peers, so they may be genetic peers as well. And we recognize that historic mineralization is developed, or as it was mined, is up in the least favorable part of the sequence. You have thin limestones interbedded with unfavorable rocks, and that's where the production came from. And we know we're sitting a couple of 100 meters over the Redwall limestone, which is the most productive limestone for carbonate replacement deposits in the Western United States. So our target is to project what's known from the mine down into this, what should be much more favorable sequence of host rocks, and try to track it back toward the porphyry. We know roughly where the porphyry is, so we can sort of work both ends against the middle. And these systems tend to have multiple spokes around the hub. So once you know where the porphyry hub is, you can look for more spokes. So, Mark Turcott, our VP of Corporate Development, did a great job putting the property together. I mean, we now have a consolidated land package that covers the porphyry and the historic Deer Trail mine. So the system can pretty much go in any direction, and it's still on our property. So this is the kind of thing that took a while to develop. And we've also gone in with a very strong focus on community relations, environmental stewardship, and establishing ourselves in the community. We recognize we want to be there for a long time, and you only have one opportunity to make a first impression. So our CSR person, Melanie Jenkins, has done a magnificent job getting us integrated into the community. And that's just the way we want to operate.
I think we also need to talk about Reyna Silver. It's a company I've been hearing a lot about recently. And to start off, I wondered if you could explain the relationship between Meg and Reyna for those who may not be aware.
Be happy to. So Reyna is run by a gentleman named Jorge Monroy, and Jorge is actually Mexican who lives in Hong Kong. And Jorge did a lot of marketing for MAG in Beijing, Hong Kong, Tokyo, places like that for us for a number of years. So we had an established relationship with him. He decided he wanted to form a company. He asked MAG basically if they had some properties that they didn't consider core assets. And MAG chose to essentially contribute their Gigi property in the Santa Eulalia Carbonate Replacement Deposit District in Chihuahua and the Batopilas District. Two of the properties we actually founded MAG on. We've done a certain amount of exploration, but Juanicipio has taken over in terms of our focus to a very large extent. Deer Trail is different because it's something new and it's a different political jurisdiction, and we were looking for some jurisdictional diversity. So MAG contributed those properties for roughly 20% of the shares of Reyna. So MAG still has a very substantial stake in those projects moving forward. And because of that, I get to work with Reyna Silver, helping to move those projects forward. My team and I generated those projects in the first place. And it's a lot of fun to be able to pick up the pieces and put them back on the fast track, because that just wasn't going to happen within MAG.
Great. So yeah, I was going to ask you why split them off, but you've really answered that in quite a concise way. What has Reyna Silver been able to do so far this year? What work has been done, and maybe a little bit about what's coming in the future?
Well, the first thing Reyna did once acquiring the Gigi property was which is in Santa Eulalia, is we combined a lot of geophysical data, redid some surface mapping, did some satellite imagery analysis. All of this was, the geophysics especially was property-wide geophysics that MAG had flown but had never drilled. And that had to do more with timing and politics in Mexico than other things. But some very good-looking targets on that. Reyna also was able to acquire an adjoining piece of property that they could combine with what we had, which basically gives us control over the entire target as opposed to about 3/4 of it. And we are expecting drill permits within the next month or less, and expect to be drilling before the end of the year. So we've put all the pieces together. We have all the drill targets laid out. We're just waiting for permits. And once that's done, we'll hit the go button.
Okay, well, that sounds great. And that wraps up my questions on those two companies. As we finish up, I was wondering if there are anything you want to leave the audience with, either about things you're working on or silver in general as we head into Q4 and onward toward the end of the year.
Well, I also work with a couple of other companies, notably New Pacific with Gordon Neal, who used to be the corporate development investor relations guy for MAG Silver. They've latched onto the silver sand property down in Bolivia, which appears to be an enormous system with a lot of silver in it, very high grade, potentially one of the few open pit silver mines that could ever be profitable, because of it's just the luck of the geometry that will make it that way. Most open pit silver mining doesn't work, partially because it's too low grade, partially because the metallurgy tends to be bad. This isn't a problem that they have there. So it's really exciting to get into the Bolivian tin silver belt. I've never had that opportunity before, and I've jumped in with both feet on that one. I'd like to get more involved if I had the time, but my bandwidth is finite, especially with the inability to travel. As far as silver goes for the rest of this year and into next year, I think it's clear that the market is responding very strongly to increased silver price. We're certainly looking at continued uncertainty. The US election uncertainty goes away in 6 days. Well, maybe it could drag on a little longer than that, but we're looking at the end of the tunnel as far as that one's concerned, but we're certainly not looking at the end of the tunnel as far as COVID's concerned. So economic uncertainty is going to continue worldwide. The strength of the recovery, who knows? The governments of the world are printing their way towards recovery. There are certainly implications of what happens when you simply print money without anything behind them. Um, so I think the future is pretty good for silver and certainly for gold as well. And it's interesting times again in our industry, and it's worth pointing out that the companies who are going to be most successful as we move into a little bit more of a bull market than we've seen for a number of years are those companies who stuck to their knitting and moved their projects and moved their acquisitions forward during the down cycle. The ones who have just slapped another coat of paint on a project that's been around for years, they're not going to come off as well as the people who spent the time and the thought on coming up with new ideas and new projects. And that's what gets me excited, is coming up with new ideas and seeing other people come up with things that make the kinds of major discoveries that energize our market sector and energize the people who invest in it.
Okay, well, that sounds like a great note to end on. Thank you so much for sharing about what you're doing right now and your thoughts on the silver market.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Charlotte. Hope we get to do it at Beaver Creek next year as we have in the past.
Fingers crossed for that.
Yes.
Once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and this is Dr. Peter Megaw.